In my 12 minutes presentation, I try to look at how energy security makes us to think about clean energy, and how clean energy is essential for developing blue economy, because blue economy is a concern for most of the countries in the world. Because unless we understand the relevance of the ocean, probably will not be able to understand the importance of developing blue economy. Because as mentioned by previous speakers, about 95% of the trade conduct through waters. What does it mean? And when you're talking about 95%, it is a maritime which is really connecting people, connecting the states, connecting civilizations, connecting cultures. And in maritime domain, every state is neighbor to other country, irrespective of location. And that makes us to think about, I prefer, instead of globalization, I use this terminology, maritimization. So maritimization of the world is very, very important for us when we talk about either coastal state or landlocked country or hinterland country. They are largely depending on waters for their trade. So in other words, one can say that the development of any state is closely related to waters. And someone is talking about it, that the blue economy is, or maritime is a lost frontier for us, or economic frontier. And we are having now the hope for development only on maritime, because 95% of waters is yet to be explored. There the problem comes, because now everyone is looking at exploration of the resources, because I don't use the exploitation, because the chairperson said we have to look for alternative word for exploitation. So we need to look at the harnessing or exploration of the resources. Now it is becoming very important for us. So when we look at every state is looking for GDP. GDP has become a buzzword in their foreign policy, and they are looking for how to make a country prosperous. And the prosperous, by and large, we look at only through the yardstick of GDP. So in that sense, we are talking about how this maritimization of the world, which makes us to think about the relevance of developing blue economy. And blue economy, when you're talking about the sectors, which not necessarily to be seen new sectors, they're all there, but then we look at how we need to harness, how do we look at this. This is, as maritime is becoming a last frontier where we don't have hope further, we need to look at how that could be seen with the sustainable dimension. And it is the most recent discourse in the developing countries, particularly the island states, are more concerned about their existence, because the rise of sea level, which makes the existence is a questionable, because when you look at Sri Lanka or Maldives or the western part of Indian Ocean or Pacific Islands, what would be the situation in the future if rise of sea level is going to be increased, either 1 meter or 2 meter, whatever it is going to be. And we look at every nation state, including the responsible countries who made this climate change, are also not taking seriously, then perhaps what to do that. Because we, from the developing state, grouping, we felt that climate change, we are not the one who are really contributing to climate change, but ultimately we are essential to be part of the solution, because we have to address the problem, whereby those who are not responsible for climate change also necessarily bringing to the table to discuss, to address, and somewhere we need to look at how this is. And blue economy has become a global trend, and we don't have anything other than this option, developing blue economy, because we are looking at how to save the world, and the future is somewhere endangered, then probably we will be in a position not to look at the future is not going to be very, very safe. And looking at the second part of my presentation on energy security, as we know, energy security, when you are talking about energy, access is really domestic, but invariably when you look at it, becomes a component or very important component in any country's foreign policy. Though the consumption is domestic, but then policy is looking at invariably became a part of foreign policy. And when you're talking about energy security, that we are talking about availability of energy at all times in various forms, in sufficient quantities and at affordable prices. That is something very difficult task for countries who are largely depending on the fossil fuels, importing from other countries. And it has become most of the, it has become very important for countries because access to energy is really important, either for growth or for eradicating of poverty. And this is somewhere a state is not in a position to look at, to provide access to energy for the commercial purpose as well as eradicating poverty, because essentially we look at countries like India where so many villages are not access to energy. Thereby we look at how that could be a great concern for countries. So in that sense, we don't need to look at because of whether it is a fossil fuel or something, whether it's going to contribute to climate change. Essentially, we need to have access to energy. Thereby, the energy which is available from the West, from the Middle East, we import, and also largely we depend on coal-based energy resources, which are also contributing to the GHG emissions, which is a major concern for the countries like India or other coastal states. So that is something where we need to look at how this energy security becomes very important, and also it is increasing in. It is going to be increased in future in many folds, and that is something where how do we look at, how do we understand, how do we mitigate the GHG emissions on one hand. On the other hand, we are obsessed with this growth, because always we are looking at any country's GDP. So where is this compatibility? On one hand, we have problem, on the other hand we have, and also we look at GHGs, GDP, but also internally when you look at many people do not have access to energy, how that is going to be. So in that context, we always look for access to energy, and we don't look at the consequences of how this consuming the energy is going to be resulted in the future. And that something makes us to be more prioritizing about access to energy in any form which will have consequences of climate change. So that is something very important for us to look at about how that is. And on the other hand, when you're talking about mitigating GHGs, what is the situation? For instance, in India, there is one report which talks about if India is going for 20 to 30% of mitigation of carbon dioxide, the situation may be poverty will be increased to 17%. And 2% GDP will be increased. Now, whether India is in a position to look for that, and how do we look at, there is so much complexity in terms of locating or situating India in the global map. So how this is going to be a multiple challenges make a country like India to think about, on one hand to mitigate, on the other hand how to compromise, and what are the consequences it is going to face in the recent times. And also this energy, clean energy or marine energy, we are talking about waves, tides, and also we are talking about tidal or solar energy, which is also now coming up very recently. And India has become a leader for the solar international solar alliances, which are going to be taken 140 countries to be integrated to have this energy from solar. I think that is something where we need to look at how this clean energy or this blue energy or marine energy, how that is going to help us to look at about our survival, about our sustaining our resources in the near future. And also this clean energy not necessarily look at to mitigate the GHG emissions, but also it will also reach the isolated communities, where so many communities which are not able to access to this energy. I think that is something very, very important. And not necessarily looking at this, beyond it, besides, we also look for how this clean energy will also have impact on livelihood, because that will also really help the country, the people to enhance their livelihood. And as mentioned by my previous speaker about the shipping, how this 2.5% of world's greenhouse emissions are contributed by ships. On one hand, we are talking about this is GDP, which makes countries to go for more trade, and we are looking at that. Maritime has become a lost frontier, or is economic force, and then we are now looking at towards water, and we look at in the future the shipping movement will be more, and that is going to make us, if that 2.5% of world's greenhouse gases emissions will be invariably increased, then what is that we are going to have in the near future. I think I have 2 minutes.
Yeah, please.
So within 2 minutes, let me see how this, going back to our discussion about blue economy, we need to look at about blue clusters and maritime spatial planning, which also will really help us to think about how to map this, to look for clean energy or reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. I think that is something very important. Once you have this shipping contributing to the GHG emissions, which are going to have impact on not only on climate change or rise of sea level, but also it will also, reduce this the production of, or it will have impact on fisheries, or it will have impact on tourism, because if you have more pollution, there you will not be able to attract the more tourists. So there are different challenges, different opportunities if you look at about the clean energy or marine energy or other sources which are not contributing to GHG emissions. So I think we need to look at the countries, and particularly island states need to look at about how these blue clusters will really help us to come together and develop blue economy and maritime or marine spatial planning, which will also make us to map the resources which are available with the assistance of this technology, where they can map and they can reduce time and also investment or finance, so that they could able to access to the resources. I think that is something where we need to look at about. But finally, let me conclude by saying that ocean health is very important when we are looking for ocean wealth. There is a strong link between ocean wealth and ocean health. Thereby we talk about we have to protect biodiversity, or we have to look at how this sea is secure. Let me finally end up by saying that to err is human, to err continuously is a policy making. Thereby we need to look at. Thank you so much for your patience.